At this point of the meeting, we have a guest tonight. His name is Archie Lindsay from the Ohio EPA. If you'd like to start the meeting.
And I'm sorry, Mayor, also, Mr. Lindsay brought, and I'm sorry.
Lynn Ackerson.
Lynn Ackerson. I'm not sure who's going to present specifically tonight.
Well, Lynn is actually our project manager who's responsible for the day-to-day oversight activities. I'm the manager of the program, so we're here tonight to answer questions you have with respect to the facility and the ongoing activities that you see out there.
Does anyone on the council have any questions?
What's going on up on North Spring Street? What are you doing up on North Spring?
The work that's going on currently, the volunteer is putting a cap over an old disposal area. So I think they started that work about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I'm not exactly sure when they are going to finish. They were hoping, obviously, to get done before the weather turned.
Disposable for what contents?
The disposal area has primarily paint sludge.
Lead paint?
There's metals, volatiles, and semi-volatile compounds.
And this is within our open ground, dirt ground, or is there a container around it?
It's in situ, in the ground.
In the ground.
Is it gonna be a hazard to our residents at all? Or is it a hazard to our residents?
Based on the information that's been submitted to Ohio EPA, the land use and the proposal to put the cap on it is protective to human health and the environment. So there'll be no direct contact exposure, no threat to the groundwater.
Okay.
There are vents, apparently, coming up from the area.
Correct.
Are they going to vent that? So those fumes or those coming out of the vents, that's not going to be harmful either?
No.
You shouldn't have anything to worry about?
No.
As far as what's being, is there going to be a monitoring station up there or not?
It'll be an active venting system, so they'll build a building to run the active vents. Is that what you mean by
Yes, that's
what they're,
what I meant,
okay.
Did they remove dirt and put sand down? Is that how they did it?
There's different layers to the landfill, or to the cap that they're putting on the disposal area. I don't have the design specifically in front of me right now.
Was your concern how the waste was placed or how we're dealing with protecting the residents from the waste?
Either or.
I'm going to assume, and Lynn can correct me, that given the time in which the waste was disposed of, there wasn't a constructed cell, if you will. There weren't liners and things that you would think about in a modern-day landfill. So somebody probably just excavated down and then placed waste and then covered over the top of it. So it's not protected in any way, shape, or form. What they're going to be doing now is constructing something that is more like what you would see with a modern-day landfill cover system.
Okay.
So there will be multiple layers there. It will prevent infiltration, so rainwater won't come down. It won't commingle. It won't generate waste going either laterally or vertically.
I think that is the main concern of our residents that live in that area is contamination of any sort and a danger to their children.
Right, and one of the things that, when Lynn talked a little bit about it being protective of human health and the environment, one of the things we do when we evaluate what we consider nature and extent of contamination, we make sure that the subject area that we're dealing with, that it meets those standards at a particular boundary. In this case, the property boundary is where those standards of protection have to be met. If they're not met, we can't give them what's kind of the clean bill of health or the covenant not to sue, as it's referred to.
That waste that was dumped there before, was that, did any of that get in our water system? Have you had any way of telling whether it did or not?
They did put groundwater monitoring wells in, and they had some contaminants on the property in the groundwater.
Oh, yeah. Way more. Yeah, before it's,
Surface.
I think to try to answer some of your concerns, the waste and the contamination associated with the site, there were impacts to groundwater. As I understand it, your water supply comes from a surface supply. So your water supply, the water you drink, was not impacted by activities at the site.
And Kurt, do you want to just briefly comment on the fact that we have testing of our water independently of this? I mean, the water that comes through our water system that comes from a separate source is also independently tested and overseen.
And overseen by a different agent, or a different section within our building, but it's still the Ohio EPA.
So our water has met all the quality
Correct.
standards. This area is also beyond the boundaries of the, we have a wellhead protection program, which was enacted several years ago. This area is well beyond the 5-year time of travel. I can tell you that, that's in our plan. So. And we've seen no contaminants from our test results to this point.
Anybody else have any questions? Jim?
I'm Jim Brewer. I'm in the Loudonville Times, National Times Gazette, live in Perrysville, or rural Perrysville. Are there any reporting requirements that the EP has when they do cleanups like this, notifying the residents, people that live near an activity such as this, of what's going on?
This particular project is through the Voluntary Action Program, and that is all directed by the volunteer. And so they're choosing.
Okay, directed by the volunteer. You mean
The answer
who's
to
the
your
volunteer?
question, yeah, the answer to your question in short order is no. There's nothing that requires an,
Bill, do you have any?
40s.
In the 40s? Yeah, I guess we don't think that the Flexible, the old Flexible company with the hearses and such as that ever dumped beyond where they're working now. We have no idea.
Well, we can find out.
Did you, has anybody been told that they dumped over there?
Well, when I first moved in, I've been there for about 6 years, and I've had family and other friends and stuff tell me that that whole area up there, where the houses are, everything up there, at one point in time, was used as a junkyard. And that's basically the extent of what it was told, is you were living on top of a junkyard.
Well, is there any way we can find out when the Flexible purchased that property or when they sold that property?
1912 is when it started.
Mr. Heffelfinger used to own that back there, and I remember he fixed buggies for the Amish. And, in fact, I worked with him, worked for him one time, painting them buggies up there. But I still can't remember Flexible at any time dumping in that area.
Along Spring Street and then there. Do we know?
I've lived there since I was a kid.
Well, there are some things that we can do here as far as possibly looking into who owned the property in 1940, 1910. The Flexible opened in 1910 or 12, somewhere in that area. And Bill lived up there right on Spring Street and
Spring and Loudon Avenue.
Spring and Loudon Avenue pretty much all of his life.
Yeah.
And so that would have been back, you probably can remember 1940.
That was back in the 40s.
Yeah, so we can see if we can determine when the Flexible owned it, if they owned it, and if and when they sold that particular property to someone.
Yeah.
Mr. Lundsey, I think maybe the fundamental question that I'm sure a lot of people have is if a person has concern about their own property, a resident has concern about the nature and condition of their soil, is there a process you can suggest to them by which they have the ability to maybe get something tested? Are there companies available? Is there a process?
You as a
laboratories?
private citizen can always utilize any of the commercial laboratories or discuss with an environmental consultant what or how to take the samples and what to analyze the samples for. With respect to your concern about whether or not there was disposal on what your property was, we don't have any information to substantiate that. Not saying that it didn't occur, but we don't have any information that substantiates that. So the focus of the investigation has been on what we know in terms of the disposal and the formal activities. What we can do, and I think Lynn has some cards, if at another point in time we can kind of talk with you about some more information that you may have, the other individuals we can talk to, we can try to piece together what we can surmise about what may have happened. And if necessary, we as the Ohio EPA may have to use our resources to do some independent sampling of some things to figure out what was or was not there. Just because there was some activities, it depends on what they did. We may be lucky in that they disposed of them far enough below ground surface that they don't pose a threat to an individual homeowner. But the burden's a little bit different. When Lynn talked about meeting applicable standards for a commercial or an industrial use, that's not as strict as we would for a single-family home use. So we need to actually take a look at that, and perhaps we may have to take some samples on our own.
And another question. Now, I don't know exactly what Superfund means, but from what the research that I've done, this site, this whole flexible area, the whole thing, all of the property has been a Superfund, classified as a Superfund site since '92. And
now all of a
23
sudden you guys
years
are
later.
doing something?
Well, let me try to explain to you. First and foremostly, Superfund is referring to the worst of the worst of the worst in terms of a hazardous release, hazardous waste site. So within Northwest Ohio, there is one Superfund designated site, the Little Scioto River. And so far, that cleanup is going to be on the order of $40 million to deal with the contaminations that's there. This site actually went through a Superfund evaluation. In other words, we did sampling Ohio EPA for US EPA, who designates Superfund sites. We did that sampling and analysis. They did an evaluation, and they do kind of a scoring to see if it rises to that level, and they said it did not. But if you look in the files, you refer to 1992, there were investigations and reports that basically say Superfund, so it's a little misleading. What they do is they go through an evaluation, a scoring to determine whether it meets that threshold. Then if it does, they may list it on the Superfund, or the state, whatever state it may be, may actually take a state action to address that site. In this instance, this site was given a no further action or no further remedial action planned, which means that it didn't score high enough to warrant any further action at that point for Superfund.
Okay. Kind of answers the question. But my concern, obviously, is just the property that I live on.
Mhm.
And the fact that all of my neighbors live right next to it. And the neighbors across the field live next to it. And all these years, the water has been flowing into the waste. And it comes right down the hill. And if you ever go up North Spring Street on a rainy day and watch where the water drains, it's right into my driveway. So my concern, I have a little bit of concern about my family. Because, I mean, everything drains coming down the street, coming down the hill, coming down from the artesian well on top of the hill, where some of the water supply goes, the piping goes right down past the edge of that field from the artesian well that supplies part of the city's water. And all the drainage drains right into my front yard and into Bob's front yard, because that's just the way the ground is set up there.
Yeah, I know.
I'm sorry, just for clarification, because I know these are very concerning issues. Here, the part of the issue there, the question was, does that water in any way filter into to the village's water system? Is that a source of water for the village?
Our water supplied from wells within several hundred yards of the water treatment plant on West Main Street and Wally Road. The location of them is all in the general vicinity.
And what is the artesian, the massive artesian well on top of the hill above the area that we're talking about with the, got fire hydrants coming down the hill and the water lines coming down the hill, and they just replaced all those water lines.
There is a reservoir at the top of the hill, obviously, but the system is not in contact with, and the water main was moved out of the area that was determined to be contaminated or potentially contaminated. The water source is separate from groundwater in that area.
Water in that reservoir is pumped up from the water plant down.
Our supply is completely from wells at the water treatment plant.
So the water that's coming off, the rainwater that's coming off is just going into our storm sewer system?
It would eventually end up in the river.
In the river and,
I mean, that's a lot of the concern, because, I mean, I understand what the fear of toxins in the water and all that stuff. I understand what it can do to a community. I understand, especially a community like this that relies on tourism for the most part. And I understand that this kind of conversation isn't something that people really want to have because it scares people. But it's a conversation that needs to be had because we're concerned, and it just feels like sometimes feels like we're being ignored. I mean,
Well, we certainly aren't ignoring the issue, that's for sure. And we've asked for these people to come in and to explain to the village as well as the residents of the village. When you came in here the last time, we really didn't have a lot of information either.
yeah.
And that's what we're trying to get finished up now. And we're trying to get as much information as we can for ourselves and for you. So,
As far as the cap
But-
goes, as far as the capping goes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but as far as the capping of it goes, my concern about that is eventually, everything you bury comes up, eventually, somehow. It will eventually come up. Somebody will dig into it, something will happen, something will shift, the ground will move a little bit. Eventually, contaminants, if they're buried, will come up. I mean, my concern is, are we gonna be having this same conversation 20 years from now? It took basically 20 years to have the conversation now, and are we gonna be in the same situation 20 years from now? Because I live in the house, I don't own it, I'm on a land contract with the owner, but if I live in a contaminated area, then there's a chance that all of the money I've invested in this house is for nothing, because I won't be able to live there because it's contaminated. And that's part of my fear. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get answers to.
all right, well, Barry, Mr. Lumsey said that you have the ability to go in and use the EPA and avenues for you to check your own property. And you can explain that to me again.
Well, I mean, we most certainly want to start some sort of, again, our filing system, our information does not substantiate what you're saying. Again, not to say that it didn't occur, but in order for us to kind of start our independent investigation off the property, we're going to need some more information so that we can make sure that we're targeting resources in an area that needs to be. From what you're suggesting, the problem is much more widespread than we have information available in our district office in Bowling Green. So we're going to need some more information from you, from other residents that may have a concern, so we can kind of piece together what the next steps need to be and how we're going to go about doing those. But again, with respect to answering your question about migration, one of the things that MCI has to do in order for this investigation to be approved by our director is they have to demonstrate that the contaminants they have been immobilized for all intents and purposes. They can't migrate off, and they can't cause a problem for someone else. They have to be able to make that demonstration, otherwise they won't get the sign off from us.
I have a question for you. It was earlier this spring when they were digging down to do the testing. You know what I'm talking about? Okay.
In general.
The company that was excavating and digging down and putting dirt in the barrels, they took the extra time to take metal fences to put around everything that they were doing and put black plastic all the way around, so as if like nobody could see what they were doing. That looked like a cover-up, okay? That looked very suspicious, okay, just by what was going on. So I just want to let you know, this is where we're coming from, all right? In other words, they weren't out there just saying, okay, we're taking samples. No, they were covering up. They didn't want people to know what they were doing. And we don't like it.
Okay.
You know, and I wasn't told when I bought the house that I was sitting next to a toxic place, all right? And
Nobody
and
knows.
EPA says, well, we don't have any responsibility. Well, go figure, I guess the government.
No, the EPA didn't say we didn't have any responsibility. We
That's
have
what you said.
we have a responsibility to protect human health and the environment.
Not to tell us though.
No, I didn't say that. I said that a person that is performing an investigation and/or remediation doesn't have any legal requirement to disclose that to anyone else. Whenever the Ohio EPA is doing any type of activity, investigation, remediation, whatever, we go to the community, we tell you, we publish documents, we establish a repository so that you can see the steps and the stages. You have contact information where you can go to people and ask questions about what's going at every step in the process. However, there is a statute that basically says that these folks under this program get to be able to do that. They don't even have to tell us. They did so because they wanted to get our buy-off on the concept before they started it. But there's no requirement for them to tell us. We have certain sites within our district office where somebody has gone through the entire investigation and whatever cleanup they deem necessary because they followed the statute, and the document miraculously arrived in our offices with a request for a sign-off. We had no idea it existed. We had no idea where it was at, and all the information is in the binder. And that's allowable under the statute. As backward as that may seem to most folks, that's allowable under the statute.
Right. So the bottom line is, people can live next to toxic waste and not know about it.
You can.
And then watch somebody digging it up and trying to cover up the plastic and things like that. And we're not supposed to say anything. We're not supposed to.
No, you absolutely should contact us
Maybe
if you've
that's
got
why we're here today.
concerns.
So, thank you.
And we want to try to establish that dialogue so that you don't feel as a community that something's happening that you're not aware of. I can't guarantee you I'm going to give you an answer for everything. I can't guarantee you I'm going to give you an answer you like. But what I can tell you is that I will be available. You can call us. We will talk to you, and we'll do the best to try and provide you information and answers to your questions.
Real quick, one thing that I would mention to everybody, if there's been some concern, and obviously I understand this is a sensitive issue, I think everybody understands that, but as soon as the issue was raised to the council, we contacted Mr. Lindsay's office, and I can tell you that they have been incredibly helpful, incredibly forthcoming. They actually suggested this meeting, said they would be happy to come and host something and speak. I don't think that anybody could see what's taken place in terms of the village's interactions with the EPA and think that it's been anything other than very transparent and helpful. Also, for anybody who didn't see in the newspaper, and if people have been concerned that there has not been some kind of notice, there was a legal notice published, and I'm sorry, Mr. Lindsay, that by your office?
That
or
was by our office, but
Yeah.
that legal notice was because the waste that we're talking about, that disposal area with the capping area, because of that disposal, in order for MCI to do any work on it, they had to petition the director of Ohio EPA with a plan that says, here's how we want to do what we plan to do, and we're going to do it in such a way that we don't create a problem. They have to give us that plan, and then we had to review that plan, and we issued them an approval to proceed. That was the public notice you saw.
Right, which, I guess the thing that stood out to me about that is not only was that published for all of us to see, but also had contact information for people
Correct.
that we could contact if we had concerns and questions. I don't know how many folks exercise that ability, but my point being, I think that there had been, for everything I've seen with the Ohio EPA, they've taken some real steps to try to inform us, including being here tonight. I want us to be careful about our frustration and concern turning into somehow saying that that hasn't been the case. Does that make sense?
I do want to reiterate the stringent testing that the Village of Loudonville's water supply goes through on a regular basis. The water is tested for literally dozens upon dozens of contaminants or potential contaminants. And we've gotten nothing but good reports back from our laboratories. I do want to address that because I think it was maybe insinuated that this is showing up in our water supply. It is not. It is not.
You've been waiting a long time.
My name's Elaine Tanner. A little history here. 1913, Flxible started doing sidecars. They started between 1924 and 96 doing buses. Bankruptcy took place in 1996. In 83 they had, or in 78, the Grumman Corporation joined forces with them. And since the 96, that would have been whenever the bankruptcy took place and the assets were auctioned off, So when that took place, then the MCI came in shortly after that, and when they got involved, they did work for repairs on buses, and they did, and before that it was a parts place. So if they're making parts, where there are brakes, where there are asbestos, is there some concerns with the building itself now that we have to be concerned with because of the operations that took place? What triggered this all of a sudden? Was it the sale? Because on October 19th, a new company now owns this property, which is called 520 North Spring Street LLC. So that's the new owner of this property. What triggered this? Was it the sale that they wanted to get out of it? How does that fit into it?
Well, I don't know if I can speak to the sale. I think what you need to do is speak to a representative of MCI or the attorneys that represent them. All I can tell you is that we were approached by MCI and their attorney about the property where the operation took place and wanting to use what we refer to as the voluntary action program, that statutory authority that allows them to investigate, do the work, and then petition the director for an approval at the end.
So the building has been checked, the building is safe?
Absolutely.
They- Right. In the state of Ohio, there's a different program in our office, but basically when you stop operations, there's a program within the Ohio EPA that then is charged with coming out to make sure that when you vacate, you don't leave a circumstance that can create a problem for that community. So they're going to make sure that they didn't leave drums of waste or that there's not asbestos tiles that can break free and expose people, or that there aren't problems that could create a problem for people surrounding that facility. And my understanding is that inspection was done already. And
Okay,
that,
would this have been done in 1988 during discovery or in 90 during the assessment?
no, this was,
Elaine, I know for other reasons, other than being the mayor, I know for other reasons, that they have drilled numerous areas inside the building, pretty much all over the building, including a building separate from the main building, which is referred to as the T&D building. And that was very recent. I can't say, I would say within the last 2 years. Is that correct? Within the last 2 years. They've drilled and checked the building out itself
And
and
those
found
reports
it.
are available? You say they do supply these to EPA?
Technical assistance drafts.
we have certain documents that are available in our office that we'd be happy to make available to people. I'm not sure if those exist in our electronic system.
No.
They probably don't. So what we'd have to do is we could make copies or something like that. We have a new system electronically that you could search, but that I guess the data came in and predated that. But we do have certain information available. So whatever they've provided to us is a public record. I mean, there's nothing that, if they don't want to disclose it, they haven't disclosed it, but the minute they give it to us, it's a public record, so it's available to you at any point in time.
My only other question would be, what are they gonna do in this building?
Oh, we have no idea.
No idea.
We have no
Because
idea.
when you're in an area that's been hit environmentally, and then you come in with another business, it's gonna hit it again, then that could be a problem, so.
Yeah, but as far as what they're gonna do with the building, the new owners, the Spring Street owners, we have no idea. They certainly purchased it for a reason, and it's I believe the people that purchased it, it's a real estate group. I believe, I don't know that for a fact, that's just hearsay.
So will they have to go through the village zoning to get a conditional use or something? Or they can just open up anything over there they want?
I wouldn't say
Industrial.
anything,
Industrial.
So-
Anything industrial?
as long as it is compliant with our zoning.
That's here, okay, thank you.
Have everybody's feel better about this situation before you come in? Have we answered enough? Go
One
ahead.
other question. So basically, the MCI did this voluntarily. They reported to you guys what they're doing, but our own town council has been completely left out of the loop because they didn't know anything about it until stuff started going on. I mean, aren't they supposed to be told when somebody's gonna start digging? Aren't they supposed to be given the opportunity to do zoning permits and give permission to dig? I mean, we're supposed to, or isn't that stuff supposed to go through them? But they've been cut completely out of the loop as well through this voluntary program.
Well, we can respond. I don't think that's as much an EPA issue as a Village of Loudonville issue. We have certain ordinances, obviously we have a set of codified ordinances that talk about planning, building, zoning issues that all apply to property. To my knowledge, at this point, I'm not aware of anything that's happened up there that falls within any of those ordinances. There are a lot of things you can do on your property that you do not need prior approval from the village, and you don't need to notify us of it. But then there are other things that you do. If they're constructing, for example, at some point they'll be constructing this building that will house the ventilation system. That would be a new construction that would require a permit from the village administrator in order to do that. But taking, say, core samples of soil and things from the ground, we don't have an ordinance in the Village of Loudonville that says you have to call us before you take a core sample of your soil. So to this point, we've not been made aware of anything that has not complied with Loudonville ordinances.
Okay, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, my name's Teresa Clark, and I live out on the edge of town. And obviously the water is a big issue because, this is a watershed. I mean, everything, it's hard to say the water we're just pulling from here. I mean, look at the geography of our town. It's sloping down to Wally, down to the river. So we can only hope and pray that there is good testing, that is true, because I'm sure at some point, some of this is getting in there because it's not, that water's separate from what's flowing up here, so.
The Village of Loudonville has a very sophisticated water testing
Yeah.
facility, and we're lucky to have that.
Yeah,
And
well,
I would mention, for anybody who wasn't familiar with it, Kurt mentioned a little while ago, the Village of Loudonville, a few years ago, the council made the decision, and largely after a lot of work by Kurt, put together what's called our wellhead protection ordinances. These are ordinances that are specifically designed to protect the region from which water is taken. And it's an extra layer of protection, as I understand it, above and beyond just all the treatment and protective things that we do with the water once we put it into our system. But prior to that, we just have a set of ordinances that make it more strict around the area where the water comes from. You can't do some of the same things there that you can do out on the edge of town, because these ordinances exist. And those were not something that we just came up with. Those are things that are developed by, I assume maybe the Ohio EPA or somebody like that. I don't remember a source specifically, Kurt.
The village actually employed an engineering firm to do the study of Lawhon and Associates, I believe, several years ago.
It's approved
They
by
determined-
Ohio EPA.
And approved by the
Your
Ohio
plan is
EPA.
approved, but you would consult with some sort of engineering firm to do the design.
Yeah, so this was specifically the Ohio EPA and this engineering firm working for the village to develop a plan to say there is a region where the water comes from that has to be specially protected. And this is significantly outside that region. And again, that was something that was developed based on their standards.
Well, the other concern is the air. You said it's active ventilation, but I'm just wondering, you know, what's being vented, and is it going to be tested? Is it monitored? How often is that gonna be done? And how can, you know, the residents around especially, you know, it's not just the water that's concerned, it's the air we're all breathing, what's coming out of there.
My understanding is the building that, I've got the permit application for a building that will actually perform vapor extraction. There are lines running to some of these monitoring wells, and I'm gonna assume it's gonna be monitored on a very regular basis, if not continually.
They will have an operation and maintenance plan that involves testing.
Testing and then public notification, or is that required to be placed somewhere? Is it online? I mean, the findings of that, so a layman can understand and read that.
Is it
When volunteers submit a no further action letter, and they do not have to submit a no further action letter, and they have an O&M plan, the O&M plans are required to be reported on annually.
One time a year, the monitoring is made public? Is
Yes.
that what I'm hearing?
That's
It's the
when.
one time a year that they would basically provide a summary of all the activities within that year, which is the reporting period. So it would have a summary of all the data, all the testing, and whether or not they were compliant with the required standard. And if they were not, what steps they took to come into compliance.
and where is that found?
That would be found in our office. They would actually submit that directly to our office. Lynn and a group of the technical staff would then perform that review to make sure it's in compliance.
And you have to submit a request for that?
If you call and ask us for us, we can make that data available to you. And moving forward, by the time they get ready to submit those things, everything will be a part of our kind of electronic system, so it would be available to you online through Ohio EPA's public portal. So you could go the minute we get it, it will be what we consider to be ingested into the system electronically. So it would be available within several days of us getting the documents. So you would probably be able to view it before they were done with their comprehensive review of the data.
Okay. And just in the talk we've had with people downtown now about this, you know, everybody, it seems to be the conversation of in any business we go in.
For, I don't follow exactly what your question is as far as
Well, I was just,
houses that are in that general area and in that proximity, they would be tapped off of that main, but in general, it's a 10-inch supply line from the reservoir.
from what you said, that you put in a new main because there was potential contamination.
There was no depressurization in the old main. It was just done as a,
So why are we still on the old main?
you're not. There is no water supply within that area that's been identified as having potential contaminants.
Okay.
A large number of wells were drilled on that property, and, as was mentioned, throughout MCI zonings. And I think they were pretty careful in determining the perimeter of the, potentially affected area by the large number of wells that were drilled. And I'm not speaking for the contractors that did the work. I do know they were pretty thorough in the number of monitoring stations that they actually bored and took samples, so.
Yeah, the people that did the testing, I mean, they actually came back and watched our 4th of July fireworks last year. I mean, they sat over there in the field and watched the fireworks. And,
Well, we do have good fireworks.
yeah, but, I mean, as far as if you tried to ask them a question, it was no comment, we can't answer any questions, and it's.
That's standard, because they're the contractor, they're not the owner and the responsible party, so that, I'm not surprised that's the answer they gave you.
Anyone else? All right, we'll do a little bit more research for you and we'll get our findings to you. With that,
Also, I would suggest that you people, especially you folks right over there that have been doing most of the speaking, contact the EPA for their reports. It's public record, is it not? So, contact them directly, get the reports, and hopefully that'll make you feel better. And if you still have questions, then we'll go from there.
Yeah, we can walk you through what we have and what it actually means. We wouldn't advise that you just come in and read something without having context. So you'll understand what the data means, why they took samples in a particular location, what our VAP standard is for that particular chemical, how our risk assessors, the people who evaluate toxicity in terms of human health or ecological receptors, what they did and how they did it. We'll try to walk you through that. So it's not a matter of we're just opening up our records and saying have at it. We want to try to help you understand what's there so that you can ask more specific questions so that we can address what your concerns are.
Yeah, the concerns with the testing, I mean, you know, we can have other people test our properties, test the ground, but what are we testing for? I mean,
And that's what we can help you out with that. I mean, it's a matter of we can suggest what types of soil, because I'm assuming at this point, for the most part, since your water supply is distinct and separate, your concern is really, especially if you have small children, hand-to-mouth activities in soil. What does your ground actually contain in the way of a contaminant? So what we would do is we would align what you should be asking the lab to do with what we have in our files for data and results, so that you're getting something that is comparable. So it's not, you're taking samples over here that are distinct and different than what we would be doing. You'd be doing the exact sorts of things so that you have some comfort as to whether or not this site contribute to stuff on your property.
So what about if you find out that your house was built out of pallets that was left on those grounds?
The house itself,
Yes.
the structure.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question
We were
is,
talking-
what if you just find out that your house was built from the pallets that was left on that ground?
that's how their home was built. Our house has a basement, but
We
there's-
don't have a basement, we have a crawl space.
your house was built,
Oh, most
Most
of
of
them now.
it-
that were on that
Yes.
property?
Most of the houses up there was built out of the pallets that was on that ground.
I didn't know that.
I'm
Well, I
sorry.
expect that can also be tested too, right, Mr. Lundsey? I mean, I assume if soil can be tested, then can wood be tested?
Well, anything can be tested, there's just a way to do it without, we don't want to damage the infrastructure or any of that. I mean, I guess we could probably get some sort of shavings and then pulverize that because of it depends on what analysis they're actually running. And I'd have to work with the laboratory to make sure that we're actually doing something in a way that they can read something. But I'm sure we can, it's something we'll have to take a look at. I mean, in all honesty, I've not run into that where the actual housing materials themselves were the issue. I mean, the old railroad ties that people are familiar with that were pressure treated with creosote. But if somebody had a house built out of that, that would be a different story as to what we would have to do to make sure it was safe. But we can definitely, we'll have to look at it. I mean,
Because our house is really old. It was built back in the 1940s, early 1940s. And we just recently learned of this a couple years ago. So this is the main reason why I've been really concerned.
Okay.
And not just about the water.
some of the chemicals, just from basic chemistry, are not going to be uptaken into like the wooden matrix itself. So they won't, you won't have soil contamination transferred into the wood itself that can somehow be transferred to you. That's some of the contamination. Some of the other stuff may. So we have to take a look at what that could be in likelihood, and we'll, like I said, we'll have to take that back and kind of work through the data and look at some other stuff and consult with some folks internally to figure out what do we do with that.
Could we have your name so we can keep it in?
Victoria Everhart.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Lundsey, you've mentioned several times people can contact you, they can submit requests, they can ask for testing, they can get things tested. What's the most efficient, appropriate way? If somebody wanted to say, get their property sort of entered into your system, maybe be able to ask questions or find out more about getting things tested, what's the most appropriate way for them to contact your office rather than everybody call tomorrow?
Everybody call tomorrow.
Okay.
Our problem is that we don't have a system that actually reacts to an individual saying, I need you to come out and sample something. The way we're structured, based on statutory authority and budgets, we're an administration and a bureaucracy like everything else. So there are certain hoops we would have to jump through in order to do that. So when I suggest call us all tomorrow, I wasn't actually joking. The more I get from people having concerns about their property and what went on their property based on the history and the operations, I can actually start to kind of build evidence to suggest I need to tap into funds in order to do this kind of wholesale investigation and evaluation. Otherwise, we usually tell people that if you have concerns, the quickest route for you to actually address your concern is for you, the homeowner, to basically have your soil tested. And again, if you want to take that route, I can help you with what do you test it for, and then I can help you with the interpretation of the results. So I'm not suggesting that you actually have to go hire a consulting firm who comes up with a plan, who then comes out, takes samples, sends it to a lab, writes you this large report, and then gives it to you and then says, here's your invoice. But the actual laboratory analysis itself, we can help you find a lab where you can take your soil sample and we can tell you how you need to do whatever you need to do to store it, to package it. They run it, you'd be paying for that fee, but we would help you with the interpretation of that data. If you needed to do something or felt you wanted an answer more quickly than our piecing together information, data, and all those other things. It's not like we move at light speed, so I'm not, I don't want to mislead anybody that we're going to come out tomorrow and start taking samples and in 15 days I'll have a result. That's definitely not the case.
Do you have a card that you can give to these folks directly so they can contact you?
Contact Lynn, contact Lynn.
And real quick, one last thing I just want to mention, because again, you all didn't have the benefit of what I've had in the last couple of weeks. When I was asked this question by the council to look into this and get some information, I really wondered at that time what it was going to be like, trying to call some large bureaucracy and get answers for this. And the things that stood out to me, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not pretending to have an answers to the condition of soil or air, so don't take it that way. But the encouragements that I had was that I found out that the property owner has done this voluntarily. Nobody forced them, nobody discovered anything, nobody, called them to the carpet on something. They voluntarily came to the agency and said, we want to make this property better. And the agency has been incredibly open and forthcoming and helpful with our office, communicating, being open about things. The only thing in all this that I've heard anybody say was somehow secretive or hidden was the contractors themselves. And when I raised that issue to a couple people over the last couple weeks, their response was, well, that's how it's supposed to be. They shouldn't be talking about their boss's business. And you know, that makes sense. That's not the contractor's job to answer any of our questions. If you hired a contractor to do something in your home and the neighbor asked him what's going on, you'd probably have some concern. That made sense to me, but everybody else has been very open and forthcoming, and I've been very encouraged by that, and I hope you have been too.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll get back with you on a few other items. If you have any questions, certainly contact the village, and we'll get you any answers that you may have, or try to.
Thanks very much for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No problem.
This evening, the Village Council called the EPA in to address some of the issues that we're finding taking place up on North Spring Street. North Spring Street is the old Flxible bus company, been there for over 100 years, and there's some legacy pollution issues that are coming back to haunt us.
Okay, now, there was a lot of concerned residents and stuff. Why do you feel like everyone's concerned about this situation now? And you had talked about, was it 1988 is when they originally?
Yes, initially in 1988, they had started an assessment of this. So they've known about this going on for a long time. Because of the bankruptcy, supposedly in my research, there was an exclusion that allowed this to continue. My thoughts are because of the new company, the 520 North Spring Street LLC that has been formed will be coming in, and they're avoiding some of the responsibilities by leaving MCI still responsible.
I mean, that kind of sums it up very well. And I do have some stuff from the meeting, so is there maybe anything else you want to add?
No, I just think that more people should be involved and pay attention to what's going on in their neighborhood. And the transparency of what we have to deal with, people need to know. When there's a Superfund site in your neighborhood, tell us, let us know so we can protect our families.